Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night from wherever you are. Welcome to this Zehr Institute for Restorative Justice webinar. Today we are excited to have Charlene and Dayna with us, and our host Demointe, and also Lindsey Pointer as well, discussing restorative justice in fiction, engaging youth and adults through the power of story. The agenda for the webinar is in a second. I will hand this to Demointe, and Demointe will introduce our speakers. There will be a time for each of our speakers to engage around their particular writing. And then we'll have some time for you all to engage with our speakers in the question and answers. And then I'll do a bit of announcements at the end and closing.
Thank you so much, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Demointe Wesley. I'm a graduate student at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University. I am a volunteer for the Zehr Institute and one of the assistant directors for the National Center on Restorative Justice. I'm so honored to be able to join you all today as a host, moderator for this really exciting conversation around restorative justice fiction. So before we jump into the conversation, I'm going to introduce each of our guests, starting off with Dr. Lindsey Pointer, who unfortunately cannot join us due to a family emergency, but we will still be sharing a video of her reading Wally and Freya, her children's book. But Lindsey Pointer is an assistant professor at Vermont Law and Graduate School, and one of the principal investigators of the National Center on Restorative Justice. She has a PhD in restorative justice from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, and is a former Fulbright Fellow and Rotary Global Grant recipient. Lindsey has worked as a restorative justice facilitator, community program manager, educator, and researcher. She has written 3 books on restorative justice: The Little Book of Restorative Justice Teaching Tools, The Restorative Justice Ritual, and what we're here to talk about today, Wally and Freya, which is a children's picture book. So again, Lindsey won't be joining us. We're sending her so much love and healing vibes. But moving on to our next guest, Dayna Lorentz. Dayna Lorentz is the author of the middle grade novels Wayward Creatures and Of a Feather, and the No Safety in Numbers trilogy, and the Dogs of the Drowned City series. She holds an MFA in creative writing and literature from Bennington College. Dayna is a staff attorney with the Vermont Judiciary and lives with her husband, 2 kids, and 2 cats in Vermont. If you ask nicely, she will show you the proper way to eat a cupcake. Oh, I'm curious. And you can visit her there at her website. Welcome, Dayna. Next up, last but not least, we have Charlene Allen, Esquire, who is a writer, trainer, and nonprofit consultant. She has served as executive leadership in nonprofit organizations for 20 plus years, working to end gender-based violence, transform the criminal legal system, and promote community-based restorative practices. Charlene co-leads the Collaborative for Restorative Healing and Transforming Communities in New York City, which promotes restorative practices to address intimate partner violence. Charlene is the author of Play the Game, a young adult novel that explores restorative themes, and that was released this year, 2023. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so excited for this conversation. I know personally, I earned my degree in literature. I'm a former English teacher. I'm really excited to, dare I say, nerd out on this topic of restorative justice in fiction. While we're having this conversation and while our authors are presenting their work, feel free to add comments and questions from whatever platform you are joining from. Those comments will come to us here, and we will be happy to incorporate them throughout our conversation. All right. So again, we are here to discuss restorative justice in fiction, how we might engage youth and adults through the power of story. Those of us who know restorative justice know the centrality of story to restorative justice practice. So again, very exciting topic to start us off with. So first up, I have the honor of presenting Wally and Freya on behalf of my friend and colleague, Lindsey Pointer. This is a groundbreaking work. I can't wait to share it with the young people in my life. Lindsey, again, is not here with us, but we at the National Center last year had a call for 3-minute videos explaining what is restorative justice from different creative points of view. And Lindsey was gracious enough to submit a reading of Wally and Freya. So we're going to share that, and then we'll have a little bit more information on Wally and Freya for you.
Hello, my name is Lindsey Pointer, and I'm going to explain restorative justice in 3 minutes using the children's picture book Wally and Freya, written by me, Lindsey Pointer, and illustrated by Stella Mongodi. Wally was a bully. That's what everybody said. They were sure that hurtful thoughts were all that filled his head. Wally stole lunch every day from Bella Joe the bear, and he always hogged the crayons and then refused to even share. Needless to say, when it was time for the kids to play, Wally's classmates all would holler, "Wally, go away!" During recess, kids brought pens and imagination soared. They wrote of pirates, goblins, ghouls, dragons, knights, and lords. Freya the Red Fox wrote the most captivating tales of terrifying monsters with big teeth as sharp as nails. One day, Freya's book of tales simply disappeared. It's lost and gone forever, or so the children feared. Raphael the rabbit spoke up fast to save the day. "Wally took the book," he said. "Quick, he went that way." Chasing after Wally, they were shocked by what they found. Pages of her book were scattered all across the ground. Freya's words were hidden under Wally's scary doodles of terrifying monsters eating eyes and guts like noodles. They all let out a gasp. "What have you done?" the group exclaimed. Wally ran into the forest, looking quite ashamed. But Freya thought twice as she watched young Wally go and followed down the grassy path to where the oak trees grow. Wally was there hanging his head and kicking the dirt. Freya saw in Wally's eyes that both of them felt hurt. "Your drawings are amazing," Freya genuinely said. This made Wally smile, and he slowly turned his head. "Why'd you take my book?" she asked with kindness in her eyes. "I don't know," said Wally, letting out a big long sigh. "I guess I just always wanted to be part of the fun, but you wouldn't understand. You're friends with everyone." "Nobody likes me," Wally said, while looking very sad. "Sometimes I get so sad, and then that sadness makes me mad." He told his new friend Freya about troubles in his home and told her how he felt so scared and completely alone. Freya sat and listened, and she let Wally talk on. By the end of Wally's story, her anger was gone. "I have a fun idea," she said, with kindness in her smile, and together they gathered her book's pages in a pile. The next day, the kids gathered by the biggest old oak tree. What they found when they arrived was quite the sight to see. Wally's illustrations were all pinned up on the bark, scary drawings of mean monsters and terrible sharks. Freya told a story, and it made them come alive. The monsters were embarking on a dangerous deep-sea dive. When her epic story ended, everybody cheered. They saw Wally was an artist and not to be feared. From that day on, Wally was a member of the crew. The others wrote the stories, and as for Wally, he drew. You see, Freya did something quite special on that fateful day. Instead of striking back, she made sure Wally was okay. There's always much more to people than we can see. Beautiful things happen when we practice empathy.
Beautiful.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you so much for sharing the video. And so, in addition to Wally and Freya, Lindsey has produced a number of downloadables that can engage young people in learning through play and creativity, just like the characters in Wally and Freya. So we're going to drop a link to where you can get some of those downloadables to print out some of the puppets here, coloring pages as well. So again, thank you so much to Dr. Lindsey Pointer for sharing this wonderful story with us. And I really wish she was here to tell us more about it, but sending her so much love and grace. Next up, we're going to hear from Dayna Lorentz, the author of Wayward Creatures. Dayna, welcome.
Thank you so much, Demonte. My name is Dayna Lorentz, as they just said, and I'm the author of Wayward Creatures. And this book is told from two different points of view. It's from the point of view of 12-year-old Gabe and a yearling coyote named Rill. Rill is feeling very frustrated because her pack now has a new group of young puppies who she's being asked to take care of, and she really is not wanting to do that. So she has made a pretty bad decision to just go off on her own. Who needs a pack? And Gabe here is feeling really isolated from his friends. They've been placed in different classes than him in their new junior high school. They're all involved in this soccer league, and he's feeling really cut off from them. So he makes a really bad decision to kind of do something to show off a little bit, to try and prove to them that he's still a cool kid. And so he shoplifts some fireworks and sets them off. But unfortunately, he sets off more than just the fireworks. They actually start a forest fire in their towns, in a community forest. And so I'm going to read for you two parts of the book, one from Rill's point of view, where you sort of see this fire happen, and then you're going to hear Gabe's point of view, sort of talking about the restorative justice piece. And I will get into that actually after I finish reading just sort of how the restorative justice piece came into the book. Okay, so beginning with Rill's point of view. The night is quiet. I whined between the tree trunks, sniffing after a mouse I heard in a patch of dry grass. There are no other coyote scents in this part of the forest, but I'm near the human dens, so that makes sense. Mother and father would never follow me here. I can really be alone. Not that they've called for me. I've listened for them all day. They haven't howled for me once since I left. I guess I really am my own pack now. Good. I poke my snout into a hole, dig a bit, sniff again. The mouse has escaped. Mice are crafty. They jump in one hole and scurry out another. This is why we hunt in packs, I grumble before catching myself. Not my pack. Runts can't concentrate on anything for longer than a few heartbeats. Some packs are useful, maybe, but certainly not mine. I mean, my old pack. New noises echo through the trees. Humans. It's strange for humans to be in this part of the forest after the sun sinks. They're far enough away, but I'm keeping my ears on them just to be safe. I drop my nose and begin tracking a spiraling path out from the known mouse hole to find his secret escape hole. The voice is still, followed by explosions of noise, louder than a tree snapping, softer than a thunderclap. What's happening? I climb up a rocky ridge to get a better look at the humans. Another boom, its echo louder. Then a burst of light blinds me. What could be so bright? The flash is followed by a wild wave of noise, scraping and snarling, strange thunder. Then another flash and another, boom, boom. The air fills with a bitter smell that tastes sour. Birds flee, panicked, their wings beating against the poisoned air. Hooves pound the dirt, making the earth tremble as the deer escape the flashes. Squeals follow the creatures of the earth down into their burrows. Where is a coyote to go? My den, my pack. My heart thumps. My mouth is as dry as the riverbed. The flashes and booms continue, and I am frozen on that ledge, my senses thumped again and again by the light, the noise, and the choking stench. So that is poor Rill, who is caught in this forest fire that started. And now I'm going to read from Gabe's point of view, who learns sort of, he sees what he's done, but he can't quite grasp that this was his fault. It wasn't his fault. It was his friends, like they were the ones who were firing fireworks too. Why was he the only one who got in trouble? So he's starting from a really sort of angry, defensive place. But he's offered an out. The state's attorney offers him an out to try restorative justice as opposed to going through a criminal process. And so he's meeting with someone about that in this first scene. It's not until I turn off the bike path onto the street that I discover that the East Burlington Community Justice Center is on the back side of the police station. The website should warn people about this, that to get there, you have to pass by the cops. The Justice Center has its own little sign beside its door with a rainbow curling around the words like, "This place is the nicer, friendlier cousin of the police station on the other side of the wall." This only makes me more suspicious. Inside, there's a beige room with some beige couches and low wooden tables with pamphlets like "Restoring Communities" and "Repairing Harm versus Punishing Wrong." Both Mom and Dad are sitting in stiff black plastic chairs with their backs to the window. Mom has her purse in her lap and her hands folded on top of it. Dad has his leg crossed on his knee. He switches legs as I walk in. "You're late," Dad says. This meeting is already awesome. The wall opposite them has a square cutout like they have in doctors' offices. A lady with dirty blonde hair wearing jeans and a fleece pokes her head through. "We're all here? Fantastic. Come on in," she says. The door next to the cutout buzzes. I follow my parents through it. The lady leads us to a small room that's just a circle of chairs and a little table with a folder on it, which the lady sits next to. I take a seat on the opposite side of the room from my parents. The lady flashes a smile like she's selling knockoff goods and knows it. "My name is Darcy Andrews, and I'm the panel coordinator here at the CJC. What this means is I'm going to help you through the process. Mrs. Meyer, you said on the phone that you're hoping to move forward with this as quickly as possible, and I think, given the extremely public nature of this incident, that's a good idea. We can show the community that something's being done to help repair the harm. At least the fire was contained to the park." She smiles around at us. None of us smile back, though Mom gives a half-hearted shrug of her lips. Ms. Andrews turns to me. "Gabe, your mom told me that you're ready to take responsibility for your part in Friday's fire." "Wait, what?" Mom grabs my hand. "He is." Ms. Andrews glances at the hand. "You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Meyer, would you mind waiting in the lobby? I'd love to chat a little with Gabe, and then we can bring you back in." "Should he have a lawyer?" Dad asks, sounding less like he cares about me and more like he doesn't want to be cut out of the action. Ms. Andrews shakes her head. "Everything we do here is confidential. Gabe," she says to me, "anything we talk about stays right in this room." My parents look at each other, then, sighing, step out. As the door closes, Ms. Andrews seems to relax. "So, Gabe, how are you?" The question catches me off guard. "I don't know," I say. "Not great." She smiles. "Listen, are we maybe moving too fast with this? Your mom told me that you wanted to move forward as quickly as possible, but it seems to me like it's your parents who are ready to move through the process. However, this can't come from them. This whole thing only works if you are committed to it." I dig my toes into the soles of my shoes. She's the first person who's actually asked me how I feel about any of this. "It's just crazy," I say. "I was fooling around, and then there were cops everywhere, and my parents are freaking out." Ms. Andrews nods. "I get it. How about we start at the beginning?" "Like when I was born?" She laughs. "If that's where you want to start." I shake my head, kind of laugh. This lady's maybe all right, so I tell her. "Why not? It's all confidential," she said, which means it's our secret. She lets me talk, asks for more details a few times. "And then there were fire trucks and flames everywhere," I say. "The cop made out like I meant to burn the whole world." Is it weird that my heart's racing and I'm kind of sweaty? "But you meant to set off the fireworks," she asks. "Set them off in Taylor's face." I snort a laugh because it sounds so ridiculous now, after everything. "Yeah, I guess." And there was a consequence to that. Not what you intended, but a consequence nonetheless, and some people were harmed by that. This place, the Community Justice Center, is only interested in repairing this kind of harm. We're not a court. We're not here to judge you or punish you. So they're not sending me to juvie? She shakes her head. Participants are expected to take responsibility for their actions and acknowledge that justice requires that they do something to help fix the pain they've caused to both individuals and the East Burlington community. We bring together the people who were affected by the crime and the person or people responsible, and together come up with a plan to fix that harm. The plan is called a contract. If the responsible person completes the plan, the case is dismissed and won't show up in any criminal record search. What's in the contract? I ask. The contract is whatever the responsible party in the panel come up with. The whole process is about looking at the community as a system that somehow broke down and led to this crime. There was no system breakdown, I say, kicking the rug. I'm just a bad seed. Bad to the bone, eh? She raises her eyebrows. I snort another laugh. Everyone thinks it. She shrugs. You might be surprised by your community. People are hurt, maybe even angry, but there's something about coming together and talking it through that can really change people's view of things. Do you think you're ready to talk with them and start trying to fix this? I dig my toes deeper into the soles, practically into the rug. I mean, why delay things? Yeah, I say, okay. And that is the start of the journey. And so I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how I hope that, incorporating restorative justice in this book sort of plays out. Because when I started this book, I really wanted to use the restorative justice process. My background is actually in criminal justice, but in the criminal court system. And I sort of learned about restorative justice because I saw that there were ways cases could sort of leave our system and go to a restorative system. And so in Vermont courts, restorative justice can be used for certain crimes and in certain contexts. And one of the contexts I found out was that it can actually go even before they file any charges. It can be brought directly from sort of the incident occurring to a restorative justice program as sort of a diversion from going into the court system. And that's what I had happen in this case. But I wanted to use this structure of sort of the whole restorative justice practice as I learned through my research what it was all about as the frame for sort of my character's development, that he was going to go through the process of sort of what I think is hoped a person would go through restorative justice, coming from this sort of place of isolation and anger, of feeling, sort of responsible and angry, and the community feeling like they want punishment and are feeling really wronged, to a place where of greater understanding and connection and community. And I was hoping through this book to sort of help mirror that for other kids, that there are other options from sort of criminal justice, that this can be a path that leads to a resolution for crime. As opposed to simply saying that there's a model where we find somebody guilty through a trial and then send them to jail, and that solves everything. It doesn't solve everything. There is a community aspect. There are victims, and I loved how restorative justice was a place where victims could also be a part of that process. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. And then randomly on Twitter this past summer, I found this tweet, which is up here, from a classroom where apparently the governor had a reading challenge. I believe this is from Georgia, and they had kids write sort of a letter back to the governor about what they read over the summer and what it meant to them. And I was just shocked to find this. It was such a wonderful. It was exactly what I was hoping for. I sort of blew up the picture of the letter, but it says, in the author's note, we learned even more about restorative justice, that it isn't just about punishment. And then it has like a quote. I have some author's notes in the back about restorative justice, but it says, Gabe learned a lot about himself and the way his actions affected people, animals, and the environment. The restorative justice program also taught him to work together to make things right again. That also taught him and his community the power of coming together to admit a wrong, hear all sides, and work together to make things right again. We believe that this kind of practice could help communities everywhere. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about restorative justice. And so I think, that would be what I really hope happens for all the kids, that they come to see that there are alternatives to sort of our standard view of what of crime and punishment, and that this is an opportunity for communities to sort of address harm in a totally different way. And so I hope that the governor takes this option and runs with it. So I'd like to turn it now over to Charlene Allen, who has a wonderful YA novel about restorative justice and many other things.
Great. Thank you, Dayna. I love that book and I love that reading. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlene Allen. I'm so happy to be with all of you today. In addition to being a writer, as Des Moines mentioned earlier, I've been an RJ practitioner for a little more than 10 years now. I began the work in a program that was attached to the criminal legal system, an alternative to incarceration, like Dayna just mentioned. And I became, through doing that work, which I thought was amazing work, but I became, through doing it, as a hardcore advocate of what I think of as community-based restorative justice, which means restorative justice comes out of a school or a community center or anything that's not attached to the criminal legal system. Because I believe that ultimately honors restorative practices in their best way, in the way that they were intended to be used, and that's where we get the most out of them. And so that's a theme that you're going to see play out in my book, Play the Game. As you can see, Play the Game is a YA novel. And that means that it's for pretty much anybody from about 12 years old on up to their great grandparents. Although my favorite ever review is from an incredibly precocious 11-year-old who, I don't know, used words that I didn't know. So it can be really, really any age. And at this stage, certainly lots of adults read YA. But because it is also for younger audiences, there's an actual game that's centered in the book. It's called Play the Game because of an actual video game that one of the characters makes, and that is in the book so the reader can play along as they read. And that's important to mention because while the book deals, as you'll see, with some important and serious themes, it's also super important to me that reading be fun for readers of all ages, and especially for young folks. And it's fun, that it's entertaining, that it's engaging in multiple levels. And so that is why at the center of this book, there is this game, and that, you know, it tries to do what life does, which is sort of weave in the good stuff and the hard stuff, and what I think young folks are especially good at, staying in joy and fun, even as they contend with really, really difficult circumstances. Here's the next slide, please. So the characters in this book, there are three main characters: VZ, who's the I character, the point of view character, Jack and Ed. And they have been friends forever. They are the kind of cousin friends that many of us had, where you're sort of friends at first because your parents are friends and they keep on throwing you together. So you're always in somebody's basement or somebody's backyard or somebody's living room, somebody's apartment. And over time, you just grow up together, so that by the time these young folks are teenagers, which they are when the story takes place, they know each other really pretty well. Next slide, please. And so onto the plot. This again is for young adults and adult readers. And so the plot is a bit of a complex plot. I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of it, and then I'm going to do some reading to help you bring you into the story. So the plot is Ed, the youngest of our trio, was murdered. This happens off stage before the book opens. Then his murderer was killed. Jack, the eldest of our trio, is the prime suspect in the crime of killing the killer. And the question that the book explores is, can VZ save Jack and honor Ed all at once? As you can no doubt guess from the title of this webinar, some of that plot unfolding is going to lead us to discussions of restorative practices. But one problem that I've had since day one of writing this book, and I sort of wish somehow I had thought of this, I don't know, before I wrote it, but it's very difficult to share with you the actual RJ scenes, the scenes that talk about or discuss restorative practices, without major spoilers. Like, there just are in places in the book where spoilers happen. So I'm not going to do that, because I am hoping that you all will get excited to read the book, and I want you to have that full experience. But one thing that the story does as a way of introducing readers to RJ is to show some similarities and differences between RJ and traditional criminal justice. So I'm going to read you a section that is based in criminal justice, traditional criminal justice, that hopefully sets the stage for some of the conversation, but also more importantly, draws you into the story. So the scene that I'm going to read is from the beginning of the book. It's in chapter 2. As I mentioned, Ed was killed before this book opened, right? The man who killed him is named Philip Singer. And that man, Singer, was also killed. He's actually found dead in the exact same spot where he killed Ed. And that spot is a Caribbean restaurant where VZ and Jack, the two surviving members of our trio, both work. And that's where this scene takes place, in that restaurant. It takes place the day the restaurant is reopening, after Singer's body has been found by Ms. Fox, who's the restaurant owner. VZ and Jack, along with two other friends of theirs, Diamond and Fisk, are listening in the kitchen of the restaurant as the police come to question Ms. Fox, the restaurant owner. Diamond, Fisk, Jack, and I stack up, one head up over the next, to look through the crack in the kitchen door. Miss Fox matches her dining room, bright, warm colors from her skin, clothes. The white cop who stepped up to her looks pale as paper compared. She's got her shoulders back and her chest thrown out like she's trying to make herself bigger. "We'll get right to it, ma'am," she says. "We're wondering if you've reconsidered your story about the night of the murder. You said you saw the victim fall, but you didn't see the person who hit him. And we all know that doesn't add up." Ms. Fox laughs. "Wanted a new song. Won't make me change my tune," she says. "Ma'am," the white cop doesn't miss a beat, "if you're protecting a member of your staff..." In the kitchen, we trade looks. Protecting her staff? Is that what they think? I get the sick stomach I got when the cops first came asking questions. Tell myself it's stupid. I wasn't even here the night Singer got killed. In the dining room, Miss Fox pulls a chair back from one of the tables, drops into it, sighs. The black cop widens his legs. "The only way this ends, ma'am, is with an arrest," he says. "A murder was committed here." Miss Fox sucks her teeth. "Goodness, for true. You think I forget that I'm dropping dead before me eyes." "Which makes you our only witness," the white cop snaps, not feeling the humor. "And of course, it's the second incident on your property, isn't it? Given the young man Singer shot last year." "Killed," Miss Fox says, quieter. "Mr. Singer didn't just shoot. He killed that sweet boy." "That's not the point." The white cop grips the edges of the table Miss Fox is sitting at, takes a long breath, gearing up for another round. "Nah, leave her alone." It's Jack, pushing through the kitchen door. I'm right behind him because Jack's too big an idiot to go out there on his own. Diamond and Fisk come too. The three of us stop when the cops are right in front of us, hands on their guns. Up close, I can feel their tightness, ready for anything. Jack doesn't stop with the rest of us. He goes right up behind Miss Fox, puts his hands on her shoulders. He's facing the cops now. I feel Diamond and Fisk go stiff on either side of me. We all know how Jack can be when he gets going about the racist system that let Singer off for killing Ed. None of that can happen in front of cops. "The only way this ends is with an arrest?" Jack mimics the cop's words. He's got one foot in front of the other, leaning over Miss Fox. I can't see his face, but I know it's screwed up, red heat burning through his light brown skin. "How you gotta fix your face to say that?" he asks. "It didn't end that way when Singer killed our friend, did it? Now, Miss Fox told you she doesn't know anything, right? How wouldn't nobody tell you if they did?" "Really?" The white cop raises her brows like things just got more interesting. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means get a grip," Jack says. "That Singer fool came at somebody with his piece. Everybody knows what he can do with that thing. No one's going to blame anybody for going back at him." "Oh, hell. Jack." I say his name as calm as I can. He ignores me. "And you know that how?" the white cop asks. "Know what?" Jack sounds confused. "Young man, where were you the night Mr. Singer was killed?" the black cop asks, getting in it. "You said you weren't here that night, correct?" "You know that," Jack says. "Tell us again where you were." Jack takes a breath, blows it out through his nose. "My neighborhood," he spits. "By where I live." "Jack," I try again. "And what were you saying before?" the white cop asks. "What were you saying about Mr. Singer and his gun?" While she talks, the black cop moves closer, crowding Jack. "Back the hell up," Jack shouts. "Who has to back the hell up?" The black cop's face to face with Jack now. Miss Fox stands up, but Jack and the cop step to the side, blow her off. The cop's as tall as Jack and bigger, broader. I catch Fisk's eye. We trade "it's about to go down" looks because I feel it, even though I don't get why. Why mess with Jack this bad? Then I remember what they said about Miss Fox covering for her staff. Did that mean Jack? Did they come here to question Jack, not Miss Fox like we thought? Cold fear cuts through my chest. Out in the lot, our car rumbles to a stop. The engine cuts. In my mind, I beg whoever's out there to come in and stop this right now. Back down, the black cop says it real soft. There's a beat of quiet. And then Jack does the stupidest thing I've ever seen him do. He throws up his hands. It's because he's fed up. I know that, but the cops don't seem to. In a heartbeat, they're on it. So I'll leave the reading at that and talk a little bit about application. So y'all may have read a scene that has sort of similar action to that one, or seen one on, TV, a movie, what have you. We need scenes like those in the world we live in, right? Because encounters like those are taking place all too often. But what's especially unique in this book with this particular scene is what we do with it throughout the story. In the book, we kind of ask the question, what's wrong with that picture, like really specifically? And over the course of the book, the story examines the element of what happened in that scene I just read and contrasts them with restorative practices. Not in a didactic way, but as the story unfolds, that kind of examination happens. So what I'd love to do for just the next 2 minutes is list out some of the principles of restorative justice, some of my favorite ones, and sort of look at how those are examined in the book. So the ones that I'm going to list out are truth, safety, community responsibility, and finally, of course, repair. And just kind of take a little snapshot of how those are talked about in the book. So truth. Let me ask the question, does the way that the police interrogated Ms. Fox and Jack in that scene feel like it's likely to get at the truth? So, of course, I think the answer to that is no, because of the intimidation factor, right? And intimidation is not something that often leads to people wanting to come with honesty. In the story, we get to see how restorative approaches are, in fact, more likely to get at the truth. Safety. Does anything about the scene that we just read, including arresting Jack, because that is where that scene is heading, help make people feel more safe? I would argue it's the opposite, that people in that room would feel less safe because Jack, who is one of their number, is physically manhandled in front of them. In the story, safety is looked at more broadly. We ask the question, what are things that are making people feel unsafe? And then what needs to happen to make them feel safer? Community responsibility. This is a big one. What message is being given to the community members in that room about their role in actually helping to fix what happened and being a part of getting at the truth or at justice? And I think, again, that it's more about intimidating community than involving them in that scene. And in the story, we get to look at real community involvement, particularly through a school-based RJ process that happens in the book. It's worth mentioning that the story includes 2 RJ processes, one of which is a school-based process and the other a broader community-based. And then finally, repair. Does anything in that scene take any steps toward repairing or even naming the harm that's been done? And what I think about that is, in the scene, it's assumed that the harm is the murder, which of course it is, the murder of Singer in this case, which of course is part of it, but the harm goes much further than that. And the cycle of this race-related violence in this community, including an increased police presence because of it, is a huge community harm, which the police in no way acknowledge or, actually talk about or address. But the restorative processes that we see in the book actually can hold that broader harm and that sort of the more complexity of how this community has been harmed and what repair can look like. So these are some of the conversations that I am hoping to foster with classrooms and community talks that I get to have about the book. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you all today as well.
Thank you so much, Charlene and Dayna, for sharing your work with us. Can't wait to dig into it a little bit deeper. Again, if you have any questions or comments that you would like our authors to address, feel free to drop them in the chat from whatever platform you're watching from. Something that I was thinking about as I was making my way through all three books is this idea of imagination and creativity that comes through in all three books, right? In Wally and Freya, the characters play and they come together to create. In Wayward Creatures, right? I mean, just the idea of hearing from a coyote's point of view, how that invites us into imagining and creativity. And then in Play the Game, following the story through a video game, right? And so I'm curious what each of you think about the importance of creativity and imagination when it comes to teaching and learning about restorative justice for both youth and adults. There was a question earlier after we got done talking about Wally and Freya regarding what age group is recommended for that group. And I think, you know, Dr. Lindsey Pointer would say younger elementary, you know, Wayward Creatures, maybe more middle elementary, middle school, right? And Play the Game, high school, young adult. But these books are helpful for everyone, right? I certainly would have really appreciated these books when I was teaching. So again, could y'all maybe speak to, you know, the role of imagination and creativity when it comes to like restorative justice teaching and pedagogy?
Well, I think that in terms of creativity, I think there's the creativity side of the writing side, and then also the teaching side. And I think for me, you know, incorporating sort of an RJ process into the book, I, of course, am sort of the least experienced RJ person in terms of the three of us, and come really from a criminal law background. So half of the creativity and imagination in the writing of this book for me was working with a friend who I met at the Burlington Community Justice Center and trying to just figure out, wait, what is restorative justice? Trying to move my whole headspace out of the criminal justice sphere into a restorative sphere. And I try to use that process I had to go through. I sort of put that then into the book because I think that, you know, my character comes from a place of not really understanding what restorative justice is or why he would want to do that, other than it's a way of him to avoid going to jail or going to court, which I think is really scary for him. And so the idea that this could actually be a helpful process for him as opposed to a way for him to sort of avoid responsibility, which I think is how he at first sort of makes the calculation about it. That was a process I also had to go through, was just sort of, wait, what is restorative justice? How does that actually reflect? And I know there are ways that it can be practiced outside of a criminal justice system, but I wanted to talk about it specifically as an alternative to the criminal justice system, as a way of actually resolving criminal cases that are being brought in the criminal justice system, which there is a modality for that here in Vermont. So I think that's one aspect of the creativity. And then I think in terms of the creativity, I would hope on the other side is in presenting this book to people and talking about it with especially teachers. They're trying to bring some more of the restorative practices into schools. And I know Charlene has a scene like that in her book in a school. But in talking to a teacher friend about it, she was saying that a lot of times that her students actually can't process, like a student who does something that impacts the classroom going through a restorative practice. She's had some students come out of that and say, well, wait, but why weren't they suspended? You know, like, or wait, why weren't they kicked out? That they require that there's a level of creativity and imagination, and even just trying to expand the concept of what it means to be just for the kids. Because I think we are given this model of like, you do something, you get punished for it. And to move to a different model requires creativity and imagination, I think, just even in that. And I would hope that these books, you know, on each age level, but for every reader, would help open their minds to that possibility that this is a way of repairing of harm. And so, yeah, so Charlene?
Yeah, I love that question. You know, Lindsey and Dayna and I, as we've talked about sort of working together on this webinar and other projects, or like, how are our books about the same thing? Because they couldn't be more different, right? But in so many ways. But when you point that out, that's a real similarity that I hadn't thought of. Like, there is a like literally art and creativity are at the center of each of those books. And I think you're right. It's not a coincidence. It's super important. Oftentimes when I introduce this book, I will say this is a book about young people learning to take responsibility and control in seemingly impossible situations. Like, how you gonna do it? Like, literally, you're a couple of Black kids in a neighborhood where something awful's happening. It seriously looks like you're responsible. You know, we all know sort of that scenario. What are you gonna do? You're gonna run, you're gonna hide, you're gonna, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna do something seriously creative. You're gonna think way out of that box, and you're gonna come up with something, and you're gonna not do it alone. You're gonna lean on adults who know some things too, and you're gonna be in community around it, but you're gonna be creative. You're gonna think differently. And so I think that is very much at the core of what we want to share about RJ. It asks that of all of us. I don't even know how you get through a day in our culture without something sort of criminal justice specific being in our mind, right? Like it's everywhere. It's in most of our media. It's in our entertainment. It's everywhere. And so to think beyond that really does call on our creativity. Yeah, and I just think it's really super interesting that it certainly didn't occur to me that that's why I had a game at the center of my book. But when you put it that way, it just makes so much sense. So thank you for that.
And I think what's great is that the game, I think that provides like a really concrete example for kids of what you're talking about. I mean, because the game is all sort of, it has some of these puzzle elements into it. And that's something a kid is like, oh yeah, no, I love doing those kinds of games and puzzles. And to take something like a rebus and say, well, actually, I'm asking you to think creatively also about this in the same way, that these are not two different parts. It's the same book. We're talking about the same ideas here. Yeah. And I would hope that that same idea of I can put myself in the head of a coyote. I think kids are really very, especially younger readers. Well, any reader, I feel like you always want to put your head in the headspace of an animal, or at least I did growing up. I love writing from animal points of view because it was we always had dogs and we would talk about our dogs as if they were part of the conversation at dinner. So it was sort of a natural place for me to go. And I think, one thing when I ask, student readers, oh, do you guys have any pets? I mean, every hand goes up, even if they don't have a pet. It's the pet they want. It's their imaginary pet. And so putting them in that space, saying, okay, let's empathize with this coyote. They can move there. Well, can we empathize with this kid who's kind of done something really terrible, who's not even in that nice a place? Like his voice is really angry and defensive. Can we have some empathy for him? And can we have empathy for his story and his development over the course of the book? And so I think that the imagination, I love that question as well, because I think it does tie so many of these different elements together.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your reflections on that question. I think about my 10-year-old niece, who I often tell, there's so much power in being the age that you are. Your ability to access your imagination and your creativity is something that I now at 27 have lost. And so to a certain extent. And so the ability of each of your works to invite young people to really step into that power of imagination towards learning about restorative justice, and also invite adults who may be a little bit distant from that capacity of imagination, to rediscover it. I think it is just such a groundbreaking thing that each of your books are doing. So thank you so much. I want to invite you both now to think about your journey towards restorative justice. And if there is one key lesson about restorative justice that really unlocked restorative justice for you, that made you really say oh, I get this. This is really something that resonates with me and my experience. In sort of pedagogical theory, there's this idea of threshold concepts, right? Ideas that if you understand that concept, you really understand this overarching thing, right? If you understand a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you understand geometry or something like that. I was an English major. So if you each could think about, maybe for you, what was that lesson or that idea about restorative justice that really unlocked restorative justice for you? And how does your work help to sort of teach to that lesson for the readers? That's a big question, but I wonder if we can tackle it together.
I'll jump in on that one first. Another great question. I think for me, it's the community aspect of it. It's the thing where it is not, person A and person B, A hits B, B falls down, they're the litigants, there you have the problem, period, that it's bigger than that. That, I did my entree into all of this work was through domestic violence and family violence. I used to practice domestic violence law. And the isolation piece of it was always huge. And how do you break that? And then it's just one of the issues with that. And people were always so afraid to be able to talk to folks about what had happened. So say I'm the victim of violence, any violence really, but in my particular case, it was domestic violence. And they were always so much better and able to move more when there was somebody else invited into that circle, right? It's your mom, it's your friend, it's a support group person, somebody else who went through something similar, whatever it is, the moment of breaking isolation became a breakthrough moment in healing. And the same actually as I became somebody who worked with people who caused harm, right? Instead of just with the survivors of harm was also true. And so in learning RJ, which, there's so many definitions and so many ways that you can learn it and come to an RJ experience, beginning to understand the centrality of that community piece was huge for me, and the messiness of it, right? So the more people you involve, all those people are, also going to be harmed. There's no way that I'm being harmed in an ongoing way or in any major way in my community, and the people that love me aren't also affected by that, or the people that are near me aren't also afraid because of that, or what have you. So it's never really just affecting one person anyways. But the messiness of once you actually bring those people into a process and give them a role and a voice and make it a broader process, that's kind of where the magic is for me. That it's by design, right? It's supposed to be messy. It's not supposed to be tied off and neat and done. And, we're on to the next thing on the docket, right? It doesn't work that way if you actually want repair. So I think that was the piece for me. Like all of the other good stuff makes sense, safety and truth and empathy and goodness and all of that. But I think when I came to terms with, this is big and messy, because it actually deals with big, messy stuff like racism, and families that hurt each other and like all the messy, then it became, this is useful. This is something we need, because we aren't really good at that as a society, at like inviting and embracing the messy. So that's my answer.
I think for me, since I'm definitely, I'm not a restorative justice practitioner. I'm a criminal justice practitioner, if anything. And for me, I think I can give a very practical example. The piece for me that I think broke restorative justice open for my mind was literally just the circle. I was working with someone at our community justice center, and I would give her scenes to look at and tell me, if if I had messed something up entirely. And so I had my first scene where I was talking about the circle where they come together, and they had the people who were running the panel were sitting at a separate table. And she's like, no, there's no table. I was like, well, there has to be a table. They have to run things. And she's like, no, we're all in a circle. Everybody's in the circle. And I was just like, wait, what? There's no one running this? And I think possibly a response to the messiness that you were just talking about, Charlene. And I think that once I was able to process the idea that no, everybody is equal. We're sitting in chairs, one next to the other, all looking at each other. Everyone has to have that moment of sort of reflecting we're all on the same level, we're all in the same space, we're all looking at each other, we all have the same power and connection. We have to make these connections here. That for me was what helped me. And it started, I guess, with their sort of practical scene and trying to write the scene. But by having that feedback, by having to rewrite the scene, have everybody in a circle, I think that really helped me get the idea of the flexibility and sort of that whole process, how it is a totally different process than the criminal justice system, and moving from that idea of the punishment and the finding the whodunit of sort of evidence and guilt at a criminal trial, to this sort of space of like, no, we're coming together, we know who did it, we now have to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah, thank you again, both of you, for tackling that question. I think it's an important one, and I think it just points again to how your work will be such important tools, again, to cracking open this thing that for some maybe just seems very foreign. Though, of course, I have a friend who often says that people need to be reminded more than they need to be taught, right? And so I do think both your works are really inviting people into that reminding that is so crucial to restorative justice. We had two questions in the chat from the audience that I would really like your response to, sort of closely related. One asked, what has been the feedback from parents? Have you heard any feedback from parents who have put your work in front of their young ones? We'll start with that one.
Well, I don't know, I mean, that I've gotten any specific feedback from parents. As I mentioned, I did get some feedback from a teacher that that the piece here that is, I think, hard to get around is the piece of why isn't he being punished? And I think that I hope ends up being a way for people to sort of open up and talk about this as a way of it doesn't have to be as formal as sort of what I have in the book. I'm hoping this can be as on a level of, and I've talked about this with kids directly, like next time your little sister breaks your toy or breaks your entire Lego set and you're about to kill her, what if we had a conversation about this? What couldn't we look at this from a different place? Could we empathize with our little sister or our friend, in the way that Wally and Freya, is structured? I think that kind of expansive concept of trying to say, like, let's not immediately look to place blame. And I would hope that also this could maybe also reflect back to the parent and say, I think that's something I struggled with early on as a parent myself, was sort of the idea of like, you've just done something, like I must do something about what you have done, to sort of more of a restorative parenting process of, okay, I sense that you are reacting to something going on inside you. How can we address that and help that, going forward? And I think that was such a huge shift for me in terms of my parenting. I tried to put that in the book as a way, I hope, as a huge shift for the character, in terms of how he even thinks about himself and what he did. And I would hope that this would translate for parents and kids, if they read the book together, or if their kid comes to talk to them about the book, to them changing how they're responding to harms and actions in their own family and relationships.
I can think of two instances where I actually heard directly from parents, more from of adults who probably are parents but haven't spoken to specifically that. But two instances of parents. One from the precocious 11-year-old that I mentioned, the parent had read the book first and given it to her 11-year-old. And then another from a parent actually in British Columbia, which was really exciting because I didn't know the book was in British Columbia and people were... and the son had won the book in a summer reading, contest. You know how you get a free book if you read X number of books. So that was super exciting, and then brought it home, and the dad had read it, and both parents thanked me for not talking down to kids. Like they appreciated the realness of the story and the fact that, like, these are hard, like not hard, but like they're complex, messy concepts. And let them be that for their young people. And I thought that was pretty cool because both 11 and 12 are pretty young on the end of YA, right? And for parents to be like, I'm so glad you didn't talk down to my kid. Like, this is a book I was really happy to have my kid read. It's a nice affirmation, right? I think it's important for writers for children to not talk down to kids, but you never, like, it's been a minute since I was 12. So you never know for sure, right? So it was a really nice affirmation. And to know that parents are thinking that way too, that they don't want their kids talked down to, and that they are not afraid of that which is messy.
I think it's also, in both of our books, I think there's an aspect of family and parents and kids. And so I think that hopefully those, like how the characters think of their parents, how the parents are talking to their kids, how they sort of struggle and grapple with family issues on top of some of these other issues, it's present in the books, it's present in kids' lives. And so I hope that would be another way for kids to talk to their parents. Oh, how did you feel about the way the kid talked to his parent in this scene? That was kind of upsetting. What do you think? How do you think they could have said something better? This could even lead to some of those dialogues between readers and their own parents and kids.
Yeah, definitely. Really appreciate those responses. As a person who is not a parent, but who has young people in my life who I love, I would be really interested in the feedback from adults and parents on their own growth and development through reading these books, as parents, as people who are learning alongside young people, not just how the books sort of land on young people and their own development, but again, as a teacher, I have found that, teaching about restorative justice is often much easier with young people than it is with adults, because we are so much more deeply socialized in punitive ways of being, adversarial ways of being. So, I won't ever see the feedback. Hopefully some folks send y'all some emails of how they have gone through their own personal transformation in their life with young people. I want to go to the second audience question that asks, do you feel that labeling these novels as RJ themed pushes people away or invites them in to both, engaging with restorative justice and engaging with the novel itself? And how do you navigate and negotiate this? I think right now it is a particularly fraught time in certain areas of the country. I live in Texas, where there are certain pushes to close out certain narratives from reaching young people. And I could see restorative justice being one of those narratives. So yeah, really interested in how you both think about the effect of labeling these novels as RJ themed or RJ centric.
Yeah, I think it definitely does both, right? Depending on the reader. I think it definitely invites some people to explore, and other folks are like, nope, not, that's going to be, and, I think there's going to be that's going to be, liberal tosh. I'm not reading that. Like, I just think it's a particular thing. And in our culture right now, I think there's a lot of things that fall into those, that sort of get accepted or denied based on face value, based on literally the cover of the book. And that's a much, much, much deeper problem in our culture. That's the beauty of hoping to be in classrooms, right? Or summer reading programs, or anything that is a little bit bigger than the institute, than just sort of people who are going to make a decision based on this. And it's also, as you say, it's the beauty of writing for children. I think children are much, much, much less likely to make a call based on, it is RJ themed than an adult would be. I think I've had kids who are like, oh, I thought it was about basketball. It's called Play the Game. But then I saw it was, then I saw it was this, and it was really cool. Like, I feel like, in fact, it would be a very different conversation if the book were just an adult book. I think there would be many, many more people who would never get past the back cover, where you sort of read what it's about. because of that than it being, for a younger audience initially.
I think the other thing is, like, I mean, neither book, I mean, if you look at their covers, are expressly about restorative justice. And, I think that, that's part of this sort of, the books have restorative justice and restorative practices in them. And I think they have like sort of a deep theme about empathy and understanding, and I mean, friendship and connections, and connecting with people who initially are not people who you think you would connect it, or you connect with them in one way, but there are other connections that you could have with them. And I think that, the restorative piece is, I mean, it's a frame in my book. I mean, like, it is the emotional, it is a process that happens in the book, but it's mirroring a much deeper process amongst all of the characters, including the coyote, who is not involved in the restorative justice process. So, I think that the restorative themes are built into the books, but the books are not themselves like handbooks on restorative justice. So I would hope that any district that's looking at these books isn't going to look at them and well, I really hope they don't think they're liberal tosh, but I really hope that they would see that these are really rich books that are about a lot of deep things that also have restorative justice and restorative justice themes, and have some of those deeper themes. I love, Charlene, those 5 principles you were talking about. Those are bigger than just restorative justice alone. And I think that the fact that those all come together with restorative practices in the books is merely an aspect of the richness of the books, and that there are so many other ways to connect with the books, and that the books connect with restorative justice. So I hope that it's neither a draw nor a draw away. It is one aspect of these 3 narratives. Wally and Freya, I don't think the word restorative justice is even used. It's more about, sort of, can we come together about this, as opposed to just isolating this one kid, when that clearly wasn't working in this little friend group. So, I would hope that people would be drawn into the stories for other reasons, and sort of have the welcome surprise of restorative practices being in there, and that this is another application of these sort of deeper themes.
I hope you are right. Yeah. Do really.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the original question points to something that for me is so crucial to restorative justice, and that is the invitation to take a look at the process, an invitation to be involved in the process. I don't think anyone is going to beat someone over the head with these books, but the invitation is there to take a deeper look at perhaps a different way of dealing with conflict and harm. So again, thank you for putting that that invitation out there. Another question that we have is around this idea that there are there's an maybe overabundance of TV shows that focus on crime and criminal justice. And there's a real dearth of maybe restorative justice centric shows. I can think of maybe one episode of How to Get Away with Murder that mentions restorative justice. So the question is, have y'all, as creatives, as writers, thought about maybe expanding into TV? Like, what do you think is the possibility of TV as also a way of inviting people to think about and learn about restorative justice?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I want to find that episode of How to Get Away with Murder. So maybe you could drop that. I don't know. Send me an email. I want to see that. But I think it's a great question. Like, how do you, like, I often say the scene, I have a circle scene, probably obviously without spoilers, in my book, which, like, how hard is that a thing to write, right? Like a bunch of people sitting in a circle, not exactly high drama for the most part. Like, how do you, there's no gavel, there's no guy in a black robe, nobody's saying, objection. Like, courtroom scenes are really kind of exciting. We've talked about this. Whereas a whole bunch of folks sitting in almost always like a dull room, with not a lot on the walls, in a circle of folding chairs. It's not what you want to grab. So I feel like all that we do to sort of infuse those scenes and that work with the creativity, because really, where's the drama come from? The drama comes from the humans. The drama comes from the fact that people actually are being real. The drama comes from the fact that, like, these are nail-biting questions. I mean, if you're really going to be honest, and if you're going to call each other out when that honesty doesn't happen, and if you're going to make those connections across the circle, like Dayna was talking about, there's the drama. And so I feel like every time we bring a scene like that to life and we sort of help folks see all of the interestingness of it and that potential there, that yes, it moves us toward more scenes like it, more people and artists wanting to be in this playground as well. So that's sort of my thought about that. And would I love to have all of our books be sort of dramatized on bigger screens? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've sat through a lot of criminal trials, and big and small, newspaper worthy and not, and they are all quite boring. Even the most high profile criminal trial is a lot of very boring stuff and a lot of papers being admitted and labeled, and it's very slow and
there's no
they don't
Viola
put that on trial. Exactly. Like, I have to say, like, I don't think there's been, I could count the moments that, are worthy of television on one hand, on one finger, possibly, because, so much of a trial happens beforehand. I think people don't realize that, like, there's that scene in My Cousin Vinny where, like, he's so surprised when the prosecutor hands him all the evidence. He's like, you wouldn't believe what he gave me. He gave me the whole case. And, Marissa Tomei is like, he's supposed to. And I think, like the fact that, you're supposed to get all the evidence beforehand. You depose, at least in Vermont, felonies, you depose all the witnesses before the trial. You know what they're going to say. So there are none of these moments where it's like, did you order the like that just doesn't happen. So I think we've just missed an opportunity here. I think, Hollywood needs to start looking at, like, there's a lot of drama, as you're saying, Charlene, in these moments of, and, every great scene, of any movie is characters being forced to be honest with one another about the challenges between them. And that just is restorative justice. So, I mean, why not have, Succession, the restorative justice circle? I think, this is a ripe opportunity, fresh for the taking.
Yeah, definitely. And we're in a writer strike right now. Support the writers. So, but looking at reality TV, how many reality TV show reunions could benefit from a circle?
Okay.
I think there is a rife for possibility. That's such a fun question. Thank you so much for tackling that one. There's another question, but we can loop back to that, because I think this next question is sort of closely tied to the one we just answered. And it is, having written these novels, do you feel that you have more stories to write that incorporate restorative justice practices? Why or why not?
I think that's interesting. I mean, I don't know that I would incorporate restorative practices as directly as I did in Wayward Creatures. I think Wayward Creatures was, I'm not someone who's writing sort of restorative justice procedurals. Like, I think there is a whole genre of book which is sort of that sort of cozy mystery or the police, investigation. I love all of Louise Penny's Inspector Gamache books. They're wonderful. But I think that in terms of my future of writing restorative justice, I don't know that I would write that same book or have the restorative practice as central to a book in the future. However, I think that just going through the process of thinking about restorative justice and thinking about that and the alternative that it offers has informed how I want to write about harm in my other books. Because I think, every book has at its heart some central conflict, either, and especially when it's between people here. I think that practice, that all of those principles that Charlene was talking about are that is how you want a book to come together. You want it to come together where characters are going to have a moment of facing this truth, of connecting as a community, of having to have that moment. So that's what I would hope informs all of my writing going forward.
Yeah, my answer is similar, although I love this idea of the RJ procedural.
This is our TV show, Charlene. We've got to get working on the script.
Yeah, we gotta put that one on a shelf and come back to it, because that's a really interesting idea. But I think sort of for the moment, I'm finishing, knock on wood, this month, my next book, and it's not about RJ. There's no sort of RJ theme in it in a similar way, but it's, I would say, roughly about family secrets. And so when secrets start to explode and people have to deal with all that messiness, are they going to require a bunch of people in a room listening to each other? Yep, they surely are. And is that going to be hard to do? And is it going to take a minute for them to be able to actually hear each other and do the things? So yes. So I think in the way that Dayna talked about, the principles are there, right? And the pieces of the process are there, but not named as such in the way that they were in Play the Game. And I think in future, it's a really interesting idea to think about, like, what would it mean to be somebody who writes about RJ and sort of legitimizes it in the way that a crime procedural is just a given, like, or a cozy mystery, or any of a million kinds of books that incorporate sort of traditional criminal justice. So I like the idea. We'll chat.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I think something that you both get at is that restorative justice is in so many ways more than just like a set of practices or a set of processes and programs. It's also a life way.
Yeah.
It is how we do life together as well as possible, given all of our myriad differences and all of the myriad harms that we inflict on each other. And that comes up even when you're not sitting in a formalized circle and process. Yeah, thank you both for that. Maybe a quick question on how either of you see the intersection of nonviolent communication and restorative justice. If you have familiarity with nonviolent communication, the person who offers this says, for example, I find that power over relationships or authoritative relationships have a tendency towards retributive justice, while RJ works better in power with relationships.
Oh, interesting. So that's a question that we talk about actually in my sort of other life, which is doing intimate partner violence work in restorative spaces, or bringing restorative tools to intimate partner violence work. And for many, many years, those two things were never talked about together because of the power over, right? Because if you are traditionally, the way that we've talked about intimate partner violence is that one person has a lot of power over the other, and therefore it was sort of an inappropriate space for a restorative response. The way that the folks that I work with now talk about that is to say, a lot of, and this is, I'm going to really try not to tangent out here. It's like a whole other workspace. I'm going to be succinct. Is two things. One, the vast majority of people who are in those power over relationships, or particularly in the victim end of that power over relationship, will never use the criminal justice system because it responds so poorly to those systems, and so they are left effectively out in the cold. And RJ tends to be a much more welcoming spot. And so we find when we do community surveys and community conversations about this, that people are more willing to engage. And so that's a huge step by itself. And then the other piece is just a whole safety protocol, that it's not that it's an inappropriate tool to use, it's that a tool that you have to make sure that you are prioritizing safety within the use of. And so we have done that. And for more information, like, holler at me and I will send you all the information from our collaborative. So without going on a total tangent, I hope that is a helpful response.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have sort of the institutional knowledge of these terms, but I think, I would definitely frame, like writing books from a kid's perspective, these are people who don't have any, that is always one problem you face as a children's book author is, how do you give agency to people who, traditionally in society don't have any agency? And I think both of our books find very different ways of doing that. But I think there's also, these are also people who have parents and who have parents who are supposed to be their agents, legally. But that idea of, well, here's a restorative practice, which is focusing on these kids and where the focus is on the kids, not on the parents. And where then the parents have to also then have a conversation with their kids. The dad in my book, I don't know if you could tell from the very brief moment he has in the scene I read, but, he has a very sort of like, heavy-handed way of dealing with things. And that's his way of handling his role as a parent. And he's dealing with his own struggles. And part of the movement in the book is him and Gabe coming to a different relationship about that, finding a different way of relating to one another. And so, I would say that like representing that within the structure of restorative justice and finding a way of moving that kind of dynamic as a part of the story, both in the context of the restorative justice, but also just within the context of the characters themselves. I hope, again, just is another way of showing that sort of like other way of dealing with things, other way of framing things. Does the parent-child relationship have to be this? Can it be more of a conversation? Can we be interacting, especially as kids get older? I'm personally learning that that's a very important dynamic change that has to happen.
Yeah, that actually, speaks to another question, and we're coming up on time, so this may be the last question. And I just want to say, Abby, who is writing a young adult novel, I want to make sure, if possible, we can get y'all connected. She has some specific questions for advice, so hopefully we can get you connected. But there's another question that touches on, Dayna, what you just spoke about. How much power can teachers and parents give to children to come up with solutions for repair in a constant, this is a constant issue. Isn't authority sometimes necessary? I think about in Gabe's instance, would he have gone to CJC if his parents hadn't sort of said, you're going to CJC, right?
You do it, yes.
Right. So, if maybe y'all could sort of speak to that, like, how do we negotiate? Dig a little bit deeper into how we negotiate power between adults and children.
Well, I would hope that, I include this sort of, person who's running the CJC as sort of an authority figure in the book, who kind of acts as, sort of a guide helping Gabe on a journey, as opposed to an authority figure telling Gabe what he has to do. And I think that is what I would hope the model would be here for teachers and that kind of thing is, you can't drag a person to restorative justice. I think that's another principle that I learned, that, if you're coming to a restorative process, the first thing that the offending party has to do is admit that they offended. It's the complete opposite of criminal justice where, the state has to prove what you did and that you did it. It's you have to come to the process saying, here's who I am and here's what I did and here's, who I think it might have harmed. So I think because it's something that a kid has to come to even on their own, that the adult's role, I would hope, in doing restorative practices with kids, in being a parent who's trying to practice restorative practices, is that you're inviting the kids into a process that they sort of have to come to agree to be a part of. And that I think that also is so empowering, even for young kids. The idea that, okay, I know, my kids have done from starting in elementary school, you come up with a classroom, constitution or contract as to how we want to behave with one another. What does it mean? As opposed to telling kids, well, this is what it means to be a good member of this classroom. Have the kids sit down and say, what is it? What do you think? Is this kind of behavior, good for our class group or bad for our class group? Inviting the kids into that conversation and helping structure them having a conversation is what I would hope would be the role for an authority figure or a parent in terms of helping kids sees the agency that's there, because especially when you're talking about kids relating to other kids, that has to be something coming from them organically.
Yeah, I think in my book and the way I think about that power between adults and children is somewhat similar. I mean, I should say, I was thinking of this when you asked the question about parents earlier. I've gotten letters from teachers in particular who are like, kid cuts a lot of school. Like, I'm not sure if that's so helpful. And he does. Like the kid is always like, oh, if I have to choose between figuring out how to help my friends and going to school, not always making the best choice. And so the adults in the book do some pulling back on that, right? And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they get blown off, right? But if there were no adults in the book, I think the kid would never be in school, and that would not be good, right? So there's definitely a give and take. And there's an adult that runs the RJ process. There's the adult in the restaurant from the scene that I read, who's kind of a wise adult that is aware of a lot of what's going on in the kids' lives and plays a peripheral but useful role. So there's just a lot of give and take between the two. The adults have power that does not necessarily get fully adhered to, but it also can't get fully ignored, right? Like it's constantly there, and the kids kind of keep coming back a little because it's there, but also stepping away and doing their own thing. And I think that's a healthy kind of, especially, I mean, again, the young folks in my book are a little older. And I feel like at that age, it's like, that's a healthy give and take that they have.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for that. I do think it's an important maybe shift in mindset, again, for adults to have this idea that like, we do have a role. Adults do in fact have a role in the lives of young people, and we have a certain skill set as adults. But so do young people. Right? So do kids. And so how do we make more space to invite them into conversation and to, as you put it, Dayna, really step into the agency that is there? Thank you both so much for this entire conversation, for sharing your work with us. I want to turn it over to you both. If there's any last things you want to say before I turn it back over to John for a few last reminders.
Well, I guess I just wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And I just want to say that it was really an incredibly transformational experience for me writing this book, in terms of, I don't know that I've had a book that's forced me to really like change my mindset on something, to really get out of a groove that has been well dug in my brain. And it was really wonderful and a transformative experience, in terms of just like, oh, wow, there is this other opportunity out here, and to sort of fight with my own reservations about it. Particularly since I've come from such a strong criminal justice background. So thank you so much for inviting us here to talk about that. And thank you for the work that you're doing with restorative justice. And thank you all for coming and talking with us.
Thank you.
I will just add my own thank yous to that. And what a great conversation. And I always worry a little bit on a webinar, like how do you get to engage? But thank you all for asking real questions and getting us to be able to really grapple a little bit with some of the issues. I've too loved writing this book, loved being pushed to like figure stuff out that you just have to do if you're dealing with restorative processes and human messiness and all of that. And I love getting to have conversations about folks about what worked, what didn't work, kids skip school too much, whatever it is. So I would invite folks to please holler at me. My info is all on my website, which is just my name. And I'd love to hear from you. So, and thank you again so much, Des Moines, for just leading such a rich conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Des Moines. You were an amazing facilitator.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for all that you shared. And audience members, we still want to hear from you as well. So we're going to drop a link to a Jamboard with a couple of questions to hear your reflections on restorative justice in fiction. And we invite you to add to those questions, particularly the third slide on the Jamboard, which asks you to think about some more examples of restorative justice in fiction that you know. And maybe we can all walk away with a strong reading list. So again, thank you so much, Charlene and Dayna and Lindsey, who couldn't be here, but who is with us in spirit, and who we are so grateful for her work. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you, Demointe. Thank you, Dayna. Thank you, Charlene, for that wonderful, wonderful time of engaging around your writing. And thank you, Lindsey, who should be credited, I think, with having the wherewithal and the connections to pull all this together. Just a couple quick announcements. So this webinar was our first one of this fall 2023 season. We do have the next one coming up in 2 weeks. And do note, for those of you who join regularly, please do note that the live stream of that will happen a little bit later than usual. Our guests are joining us from New Zealand. And so we are doing the live stream at a time that is workable for them. And so that means it's a little bit later our time. But see and please join us for that webinar. And then also, as always, feel free to visit our site. All of the archive of webinars from the last 11 to 12 years are on the website. They're also on our YouTube channel. So please visit us there. And we always love support. There's a place to support the Zehr Institute on the website, and would invite you to do that as you wish. Again, thank you for joining us, and see you next time.